the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me, as always, is my producer, Kevin Black, my co-host, Stephen Gillespie, and we're recording this on a Monday. We only have so many of these Mondays, quote-unquote, in season left. But while we have them, Tyler Rucker, a.k.a. Backcourt Violation, is joining us as he always does to talk about actually not what the hell Nate wrote this week. We're trying to recap some games that happened in the tournament, not talk about necessarily what's to come. We'll save the previews for a different show, but we wanted to come together. We want to talk about what happened during the first week of March Madness. How is any of it relevant to the scouting world that we're all in? What were some of the things that we were all excited about? What are some of the things we're a little nervous about? And what are some points that people should go pay attention to in case they want to go back and rewatch some of these games? So, Steven, I'll start with you, my good man. How you doing tonight?
Man, I'm doing awesome, Nathan. Fun weekend of basketball. Made a couple guest appearances. You know, of course, I'm bumping the No Ceilings brand everywhere I go. I'm excited to be here on a beautiful Monday and talk about these games before Thursday happens.
Yeah, you have zero excuse to mess up on this podcast because you literally just did this same exercise with Rafael Barlow over on the Locked On NBA Draft Show. Congrats to that guest
Thank
spot of
you.
yours, by the way.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, no excuses. You better be an all-star tonight.
Dude,
Rucker,
I'm full of Red Bull and water. I'm ready to go.
Rucker, how you doing?
I'm good. A long weekend of college basketball. I guess a long week, really.
You look as tired as I am, so it's all good.
Yeah, I think it's only going to get worse too. So I'm ready. This is the real gauntlet. We're finally in the heart of draft season, and it's only going to get more crazy and chaotic moving forward. But what a great weekend of college hoops, and I'm excited to talk about it with you guys and break down what's going to be happening moving forward and some of the prospects. Like, this is going to be a good one.
Nathan, what's the over/under on Rutgers staying awake for the whole show? What do you got?
I'll give it an hour. So
give it an hour. All right,
I'll give it an hour.
I'm in the time of the year where I'm like, I wouldn't recommend this to anyone, but I'm training my body to like stay up till 2 or 3 at least. So I'll be fine. I'll be okay.
All right.
I got backup generators rolling right now. I'm gonna be all right. So don't worry about it.
If any one of Starbucks or Red Bull just wants to sponsor No Ceilings at this point, we will gladly rock your product from here on out. So no worries on that front. So let's get started. I figured we would run through some of the Saturday games that we wanted to touch on and then kick it over to some of the Sunday games. We will end on arguably the most exciting game of the weekend, in which Steven and Tyler will have so many thoughts to share. I probably won't even have to talk once we get to that game. But we'll start with the Saturday slate. The game that everyone wanted to see the most in the scouting world was Gonzaga and Memphis, a.k.a. Chet Holmgren against Jalen Durant. Now, that game did not end up being that matchup specifically in terms of what actually happened in the game. It was a lot of the role players for both teams, but we do have to touch on the two top prospects because we're looking. They're arguably two top 8 prospects going up against each other in the NCAA tournament. That rarely happens on a year-to-year basis. So, I mean, Chet Holmgren, 9 points, 9 rebounds, 2 assists, 4 blocks. He did have 5 personal fouls, a.k.a. he fouled out of the game. 4 of 7 shooting from the field, 0 of 3 from 3. So not necessarily lighting it up. But Mr. Durant did not exactly light it up either. 7 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 block, 4 fouls. So very close to fouling out, but he actually kept himself in the game. 3 for 11 shooting from the field, 1 of 2 from the free throw line. So obviously, we're not looking at 15-plus shot attempts for either player. We're talking about big men who are generally more of the play finishers / cleanup guys for their teams anyways. So we didn't think it was going to be a sexy scoring battle. They weren't going up against each other the entire game, but they did match up a few times on the block. And I would say that each of them got the best of the other in certain situations. I didn't feel like the matchup, when it did happen, was particularly one-sided. I would probably still say Chet overall, even though he fouled out. I still feel like he impacted the game in a whole more than Durant, but I really think this could be something that could be argued either way. What do you think, Steven? Who do you think won the battle between the two prospects? Who really stood out to you the most and then maybe helped themselves?
It's really weird. I would say just based on who we have being the better overall between the two of them, like you just touched on, Nathan. I think that Chet was the guy that stood out more, but I don't think anybody got any more clarity on what they were kind of hoping to see when the game was finished. I think that the people who think that Chet might have some problems going up against some physical post players, they got a little validation in that matchup. The people who thought that Chet's skill is going to outweigh any sort of physical, limitations or deficiencies that are in his game. I think they got validation too. I don't think that anybody walked away any more victorious than they did coming into the game. And as far as evaluating Chet Holmgren, I like Durant a lot in this game, even though it was like limited sample size. It wasn't the most efficient scoring. He showed that he can continue to battle. The motor is what really stood out for me because he could have got really discouraged like a lot of young big men do whenever they're getting their shots blocked. But he played hard. He ran the floor. He moved the ball, and he rebounded very well too. He didn't give up on the first attempt. I'll put it that way. And again, Chet Holmgren. I mean, we saw him on the block a lot. We saw him block some shots, but what really impressed me was that he wasn't afraid to try to take Jalen Durant off the dribble on the perimeter either.
Yes.
So those were things that kind of stuck out to me in their matchup.
Rucker, what stood out to you?
I think the overreactions are going to be a little bit crazy. It's exactly what I expected, and I'm not trying to be like a buzzkill here, but I think we were going to go into this game and everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, two big giants going up against each other, potentially the number 1 pick and a top 10 pick that's making some noise lately." And thought it was pretty much what we should have been expecting. A little bit of going back and forth when they had limited samples to go at each other. Chet showed that he could struggle with the strength. He also showed he could make some plays away from the ball and kind of also deal with it. Durant showed that the motors started to come alive. He showed some impressive flashes too. Like Steven said, I don't really think we went any other way. I think we're still right there on the fence where it's just like, okay, we know what these guys are. I didn't go into that game thinking like, oh, Chet might put up 20 and 15. Like I was just like, that's just not really what Chet does all the time. I know he's had some big box scores this year, but I don't even think that's going to be his type of playing style in the NBA. I think he's going to be more of one of these 15 and 11 with blocks each game. I think he's just going to be a guy that makes your defense a lot better. I will say, like, I've been impressed with what Durant's done over the last month. Definitely started to make me eager to go back and watch his film even more. So, it wasn't too surprising for me. The big winner of this game was Drew Timme. I mean, Drew Timme's all of a sudden starting to really heat up again. I think he's been absolutely magnificent lately, and
he even made a 3-point shot.
Yeah, I mean,
that's not something we see every day.
Timme does this every year. I mean, the mustache gets some magic in March, and all of a sudden now we're going to be like, okay, is Drew Timme coming back into the top 60 conversation again? Because, if Gonzaga keeps having a lengthy run, what's fascinating about Gonzaga lately is they've gotten off to really slow starts. Because I had some buddies text me at like halftime, like, I think Gonzaga was down 10, and they're like, "Is Gonzaga frauds?" And I was like, "No, they just kind of do this, and then they just find a gear and start rolling." So
they did it against Georgia State in their opening game. Like that went into the half kind of scary, and then they blew it wide open in the second.
Right. So I mean, I'll be interested. I think you can get away with that in the early rounds, but now you better tighten up because you can't be going from 10 down going into the second half against these better teams.
Before I toss the mic back over to Steven, because we brought up Mr. Tim, and we might as well knock out one of the weekend warriors from Steven as we're talking about this game. But the last thing I think I want to say about Durant, I mean, Chet, we've talked about all year about it's not that he has this excessive motor, but I think that he's just so aware of what's going on within the game at all times that he's kind of just determined to make an impact regardless of what's going on. Durant was fascinating because yes, the motor was running pretty hot, but something I've noticed this second half of the year, all the way through up until now, this tournament exit of theirs, his willingness to try things and his willingness to accept failure on the basketball court. Like he's not shy taking those mid-range jumpers anymore. He wants everybody to try and see that that can be a part of his game. And is it a consistent part of his game yet? No, but accepting failure and dealing with the fact that if that's not a staple, you're going to miss some shots and there are going to be times where it doesn't look pretty. I think that's really a big thing for Durant that we've wanted to see, and that kind of ties in with the motor running hot. We just want to see him engaged. We want to see him trying. We want to see him at least attempting to impose his will in multiple different facets of the game, not necessarily just being a rim running big man. Because if that's solely what he is, we could talk about his physical attributes. But if that's really what he is, I don't think that's what anybody's necessarily taking him in the top 10 for. We're intrigued with some of the other flashes of skill that we've seen from him, and the fact that he's willing to experiment on the court, even in a game like this where all of the pressure's on him to live up to expectations against somebody like Chet and even Drew Timme to an extent, because Timmy's been one of these more dominant players in the postseason. Like, I actually think he carried himself very well, even if the results weren't there. And that's why I think Chet had the better performance. But in terms of why I think it's an argument, I liked more of what I saw from Durant from a scouting perspective and what I learned from watching in that point of view more than what I saw from Chet on the other end. That was really how I wanted to tie the knot on that one. Any other thoughts on the two bigs, Steven, before you talk about one of your weekend warriors?
No, and if I could just plug some other prospects just real quick, we don't even got to talk in depth about them or anything. Dandridge might have had like the dunk of the night, putting it up on Chet Holmgren the way he did. I know that one is going to be used against Chet exclusively when we talk about who should go number one. And, you know, like Tyler said, that's where the overreactions are going to come in. Like, Dandridge is a fine player, but let's calm down.
Stop
and
it.
Also,
Dalen Terry's your number one pick. Stop it. Stop it.
we're gonna park the show for an hour on Dalen Terry, but and I also want to just real quick touch on Amani Bates getting playing time in that game too.
Boy.
He's not gonna come out this season, but the fact that he's coming back off of an injury which put him out in July, and now he's coming back and being trusted with tournament minutes, I think that speaks to, you know, the trust that, you know, Coach Hardaway has in him.
I guess the other name I'm surprised you didn't mention when you talk about, you want to mention other guys, Andrew Nembhard. I think Andrew Nembhard was also a really big winner from this game too. And like,
I was waiting for Rucker to bring him up.
That's my guy.
People want to try and talk about these senior point guards who can sometimes go under the radar in terms of like, why would I waste a draft pick on a guy like this in the second round when he's probably going to be there for me to scoop up in the undrafted market? I can bring him in on an easy two-way contract. If he slips past at some point, like, these are gonna, some of the guys that will be around, maybe he's like an Exhibit 10 guy or like something like that. Like, these guys are generally around, but Nembhard shooting not only just 6 of 12 from the field, but also 5 of 10 from 3-point range. Yep. That's huge, and we already know what he brings to the table as a leader, as a floor general, and a passer, somebody who can get others involved and make them better. Like Rucker, if that's your guy. Did he show you anything in this game specifically, or you kind of just you've known that he was capable of putting a performance like that all along, and it's just people just need to start taking more notice?
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before. I think it was even with Steven. I think he's draftable for sure. You know, you're talking 6'5". He just turned 22. I know he's a senior, but like, he's got good size. He knows how to play the game. He knows how to run an offense. You can also see that like he has the ability to get buckets if he needs to. I think if Gonzaga is going to have a shot of getting to the national championship, it's going to be because of him. I know everyone's going to talk about Chet, and Gonzaga has a number of prospects that next year I think we're all very high on with Nolan Hickman and Julian Strother, but Nembhard is a gamer. The guy knows how to play, and I still believe like in the second round at some point, he's something you'd want to add to the rotation. He's a guy you want on your roster where he could groom into a really nice piece that gives you good minutes off the bench. So like you're saying, Nathan, I think he's draftable. I would definitely draft him at some point of the second round, but you know, this also could be a guy that's targeted as a two-way contract that maybe spends some time in the G League before coming up. But I really like how Nembhard's been playing all year. I think he doesn't get enough attention or recognition for what he's done for that team. He doesn't have to be a guy that scores 20. He also understands that like some nights I might need to score 9 and give out 10 assists for my team to be rolling at full capacity. So I really like him, and I think he's going to keep buzzing if Gonzaga can keep pushing towards the national title. He's going to be one that could probably make up a lot of ground and buzz in draft circles.
Well, we are those guys who would probably elect to use second round picks based on guys who we're pretty confident can produce at an NBA level. Not necessarily just swinging all for upside in the back end of the second. Like Rucker, you would make an argument for somebody like Andrew Nembhard or even like a Trace Jackson Davis, like in the back end of the second round, with some others might not. And I would tend to agree with you in that argument. I would rather go get veteran, proven, trusted talent with one of those picks, somebody who could ideally contribute to a team sooner rather than later, who also fill positions of need on very, very cheap contracts at that point. You don't have to worry about engaging and paying them even more money than you would with like that type of a second round pick. So
and Maxwell did a really good job for us at the NoCeilingsNBA.com, our website. Maxwell just released an excellent piece on Andrew Nembhard too. Right. I think for people who want to listen to any more about the value of his game and what he could be in the NBA, I'd recommend go reading that article. It was very well put together.
So Drew Timme, Steven, why is he one of your Warriors of the Week? Talk about it.
Well, let's see here. Opening round against Georgia State, he put together 32, 13, 2, and 1. Against Memphis, he put together 25, 14, and 4. So, I mean, he's showing that he's one of these tournament guys that, we can talk about philosophy as to how important these games are. But being honest, whether or not this is how we would evaluate things, a lot of people are getting their first opportunity to watch college basketball around this time of year. And Drew Timme showing up the way that he is, I wouldn't be surprised. We could talk about a guy here in a little bit too, like Colin Gillespie, guys who show that they are part of a winning program for multiple years. They have like these intangible qualities about them that just contribute to winning basketball. He's polished. He doesn't play outside of himself. He doesn't get sped up, regardless of if we would even like him to. He plays within himself. He understands his limitations and capabilities. And the fact that he's putting up these performances against Georgia State obviously isn't like a world beater, but it scared Gonzaga, and I'd be willing to bet that they could have scared any other team if they could do that to Gonzaga. And then against Memphis, everyone made these headlines about how it was going to be Holmgren and how it was going to be Durant. And Timme said, allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Drew Timme. And he came in and did his thing. And the fact that he's showing out the way that he is, Nathan, we've done interviews with guys like Matt Babcock, who said that he would potentially look at a guy like Drew Timme in the draft too. So
same conversation as Nembhard and like Jackson Davis, like same conversation.
Exactly. So he's doing everything that he can to propel a number one seed to the Final Four, potentially play for a championship game. That's why he's the Warrior of the Week, man. He just everything that was needed for Gonzaga, he did some and more.
So let's move to one of the other exciting games that took place on Saturday. North Carolina and Baylor, actually. I did get to catch a really good portion of this game live. I didn't have to go back and necessarily watch anything. And I'm glad that I did catch this one live because it was a phenomenal watch from start to finish. Plenty of excitement, an overtime game. RJ Davis was obviously the big winner from a performance perspective on North Carolina. We haven't necessarily a prospect. Really, we've looked at Caleb Love being the guard prospect for the Tar Heels. He did not have a standout performance. He fouled out of the game, 5 points on 1 for 6 shooting, 1 of 4 from 3-point range, 2 assists to 6 turnovers. That is about as horrific of a performance as what could happen for a guard like Mr. Love. And Steven and I will be hosting Coach Adam Spinell over at the Box and One over on this podcast later in the week. So that is a guy who we will be touching on. I cannot wait to get Coach's perspective on Mr. Love, because sometimes, quite frankly, he drives me a little crazy. I don't want to steer too much of the conversation, though, toward his way. I mean, when we're talking about these two matchups right here, we're talking about the Baylor guys, right? In terms of Kendall Brown and Jeremy Sohan. And Rucker, I'll start with you because you and I have tried to be on the Kendall Brown train for I think as long as possible, and I would consider myself still on the train. But in terms of having him over somebody like Sohan, like I'm basically at my breaking point. Like I don't think I can do it anymore. They were so close in my last update. I think I had Kendall Brown 12, Jeremy 13, but where Jeremy was consistently active throughout that entire game on both ends of the floor, even if he didn't have a standout shooting performance either, you just never catch Jeremy at a point in the game where you don't notice him, right? And Kendall
Right.
just disappears throughout the course of the game. And he will have some very standout athletic moments. He will actually make some really good plays on the ball. He's got quick hands. He forced 3 steals the other day. And then offensively, we know about what he brings as a cutter, as a transition finisher. Some of the jump shot stuff, I think, still has some room for improvement, but I think it will be there for him in time. But it's just not consistent. And I bring this up as like a guy that some of you guys have brought up as somebody you like Wendell Moore, for example, at Duke, who we'll probably talk about a little later in this podcast. Like one of my gripes with him is that I will watch games and some of the box score stats will be there, but like I don't always feel his impact from game to game, or at least it doesn't feel like that to me, right? Well, Kendall Brown's even worse than that because he doesn't even sometimes have the numbers to back up an argument like that. So Rucker, what did you see from both of those guys on Saturday, and where are you kind of at on them right now as prospects?
This is why I love you so much, because I can just be having a Monday of all Mondays, and you literally like this is exactly what I was going to want to talk about with those two guys. So thank
Board
you.
the train, baby. Board the train.
It was better than a cup of coffee. So thank you. I really needed that. No, I'm right there, completely 110%. Like that's been bugging me literally the last 24 hours because that's something that's really important to me when I'm scouting guys. If you disappear, I'm gonna have a problem with you. If I can watch 5 to 10 minutes and you're on the court and I in the middle of that go, oh my gosh, he's on the court, like that's bad. Yeah, and I'm not saying you have to be scoring or you have to be, making all these highlight plays, but I need to know your impact. I need to feel you. That's why I love Chet Holmgren, because you're constantly like, not just because he's so tall
He's
and
always
lanky,
he's
he's
always
all over the place. He's always moving. He's always doing something, and that stands out. Kendall has been someone that I've been very high on all year. I really like his game. I really like the upside. But the longer the year's gone on, the more you're starting to see there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think it's just a confidence thing. Like we said about this earlier in the year, Nathan, me and you, and I've said it with Metcalf on the No Ceilings pod. Like you can definitely tell the outside shot he's not confident with. It looks fine, but there's just hesitation to even take it. Sohan, watching that game, like I feel his impact. I feel he's moving around. I feel he's doing a lot of good things. So, I had Kendall 15th on my last big board. I had Sohan 17th. They're probably swapped right now. And I'm starting to understand the buzz with everyone about Sohan. I really like his game. I think there's some really promising tools to kind of come together down the road. Like if he goes to a right team, I'm gonna be very excited for that. And he's just what I want Kendall to be. Like Sohan is at least confident with everything he's doing on the court. If he makes a mistake, he's at least confident and going balls to the wall. Kendall, there's just still some hesitancy where like I don't know if he really knows all he can do yet, if that makes sense. Like I think he understands like, okay, like I have this freakish athleticism, but I still have to figure out what I can do with it. So
he still has a massive ceiling. Like I think sometimes that gets lost in the conversation.
Yeah.
Like he has the ceiling. It's just I agree with you what it's going to take to actually reach it. There's a lot of work that's going to have to be done, and maybe not as much as what needs to be done with Sohan for him to reach his potential.
Right, and when we talk about guys like this, it's not like I'm downplaying Kendall. I still love him. I'm just saying he might need to go later to a team that doesn't need him to contribute right away in like an expanded role. He might need a team that's like, hey, we want you to come in, give us energy with rebounding and making the extra pass while everything kind of develops over the years. Sohan might be doing a little bit more because of his defensive ability and, playmaking and stuff like that with the outside shot coming along. So, just watching those games, like Kendall had a couple lapses where I was like, damn, I forgot Kendall's on the floor. And I mean, it's hard when he has that gigantic flock of hair, but I'm like you. I'm really starting to. I think it's finally getting to that point where I'm going to flip those two. And I never really thought it was going to happen, but I think watching these games again, with what I've watched of Sohan lately, like with my recent film dive, I'm doing a little bit more on him. Like, I really am becoming a fan.
Steven, the thing that impressed me the most, the one play that made me walk away and go, all right, I think I really need to reconsider this and change things around, was when RJ Davis had Jeremy Sohan at the top of the arc to try and ultimately close out a game, right? And Sohan's kind of left on an island by himself in a normal circumstance in the tournament. We're not talking about regular season. We're talking about big things are on the line. NCAA tournament. If an experienced guard like RJ Davis gets you on an island, gets a freshman on an island in that situation, generally you're clapping. You're like, beautiful. Like, this is exactly what we want. But Jeremy Sohan, you're not saying that about him. Like, that dude is ready for the moment, and he's fully willing to live up to it defensively. He will guard anyone, everybody at any time. And the fact that we can't look at Jeremy Sohan the way we would normally look at a lot of other freshmen on defense in that situation, I think that should be the play that should really speak volumes to everybody.
Yeah, and the thing that speaks out to me about Sohan is something that Tyler just touched on in his breakdown, is that he's not afraid to mess up. And I think that speaks to the confidence that he has in his abilities. Like, the things that we love about Kendall Brown is that the thing that I constantly say about him is that he has to try harder to stay on the ground than he has to, than it does for him to be able to jump. Sohan isn't gifted like that, but that he understands and he knows how to play with, kind of under controlled pace, and he knows what his next move is going to be. And that's the thing that I think Kendall still needs to figure out, is what happens next. Like, okay, I have this great sudden burst, but he doesn't know what his next move is going to be. Sohan understands how to use counters to his ability too, and take people off of the bounce a little bit. And that's what I think is going to help him translate a little bit more, successfully at the next level, is that he's not just going to be a guy that potentially works on a pick and pop, or maybe he is just a good cutting four. The fact that he can make plays out of a short roll, I think, is going to help him tremendously. And that's not something that I can confidently say about a guy like Kendall Brown right now, who projects as kind of like a 3-4, depending on the system or what have you. I trust Jeremy Sohan a lot more right now. And I think just by watching them play, you would assume that Jeremy Sohan is so much more, he's older, he's in a higher class, but they're both freshmen. And if you just watch the way that these two young guys play,
and they're both young, by the way, they're both two of the youngest players in the draft class.
But Sohan plays with so much more maturity and composure and poise, and there's no moment that he looks at that he's afraid of. And that's something that an NBA team is going to look at. But again, if you look at the pecking order of the way this Baylor team is drawn out, that's what I think it can kind of hamper people's evaluation of a Kendall Brown, because there's so many other players that their coach is going to ask to put the ball in their hands and ask to do more. Maybe that has to do with the talent level or the capabilities of a Kendall Brown. But also, you can't knock that, Kenjo's on this team. Matthew Meyer is a senior, and he does a lot of things off the bounce. Obviously, Jeremy Sohan is asked to do a lot as well. Flagler, there's a whole slew of people that are asked to create. And that hasn't been something that's been a focal point of building, the repertoire of a Kendall Brown. And maybe when he gets to the NBA, that's something that if he goes to the right team, like maybe in Orlando, in Oklahoma City, a Detroit, like a team that has talent but kind of lower media reach, a place where he can kind of safely grow, maybe that's something that a team can look at to develop with him, because he's not getting it at Baylor right now.
So just to close on this point before we move on to the next game, Steven, I used to use that argument as a little bit of a crutch for Kendall Brown. Like, this is a team that's built very similarly to the Baylor team that was last year. It's built around 3 higher volume guards. You still have Matt Meyer, who's going to get his shots up, and then at some point there's going to be room where the bigs have to be fed as well. Like Flo Thamba, when Jonathan Chamachacho was playing, like those guys are going to get offensive boards. They're going to get their shot attempts as well. So how much room is there for somebody like Kendall Brown to get like more than 5, 6, 7 shot attempts per game? Well, that argument falls flat on deaf ears when Jeremy Sohan gets up 14 shots per game, or 14
off
shots
of the
in this
bench.
game off the bench, and Kendall Brown only
Yeah.
got up 7. So that's really where their argument falls apart. And I can't.
He's trying to advocate for Kendall because we all love him. Just trying to poke holes into whatever I can find right now because we all want him to succeed. And there might be a little bit of validity to that, but just grasping at whatever straws I can find right now, Nathan.
I still think that, like, if we're talking pure upside, Kendall Brown could have like top 6 upside in this draft class. Like, that's not unreasonable, but it's going to take a lot to get him there, and maybe that's just not baked into his DNA. I hate to have that conversation about some prospects, but it's also a true thing that happens behind closed doors. The whole point of Draft Deeper is to try and enlighten the community about what these conversations actually look like, and there are people that are going to say, well, does he want more responsibility within the offense? Does he want to be taking more shots within the offense? Or is he comfortable just standing by and when things are going well, it's great. You know, what kind of player is he in that regard? And if he doesn't want more responsibility, more opportunity, more shots to improve his game, how much better is he actually going to get? Is he going to live up to that potential that he has?
So I think he should want to grow up to be just like Robert Covington in the league right now. Like, that's the poster that you want in his room, in his dorm room right now, is at least floor level, right? Like, you would like to see him contribute on that level with the ceiling to be whoever the heck he wants to be.
Well, you know what? Robert Covington became a sniper from 3-point range, so that'd be a pretty good role model for him. If he could really become that 37, 38% 3-point shooter consistently, I think it would open up a lot more doors for him than are open right now. But let's move to the last game that we would talk about that happened on Saturday, Michigan against Tennessee. So this was on the Michigan side of things. This was not one of the bright spots for Caleb Houston. Kind of took a little bit of a dive compared to what he was doing in the end of the Big Ten season, and then in the first few games. Moussa Diabate, I think, had a very strong game as a supporting man in the front court, along with Hunter Dickinson, who clearly stole the show from tip-off through all the way through to the end. On the Tennessee side, there have been a lot of mixed opinions about Kennedy Chandler. I've thrown a lot of those mixed opinions out there in the open, including on this podcast as well as in written form, in terms of I haven't had him ranked as a first-round prospect for quite a while because of some of the things I've seen in terms of him being able to create oversize, him being able to shoot oversize. Well, Chandler had 19 points, 9 assists, 9 of 19 shooting from the floor, 1 of 3 from 3-point range. But in this game in particular, a lot of the matchups that he had offensively when he was the mid-range killer, he had more favorable matchups when we're talking about size-to-size comparison, right? He wasn't in a situation where he was playing a team like Arizona that is the land of giants, and he tried to create over everybody, and he threw up a stinker, just like he did exactly against that team earlier in the year. So where I do think some of my questions are absolutely valid, he has had some performances this year, including leading his Tennessee team to a 3 seed, winning the SEC tournament as a freshman point guard. That is not something you see from somebody his age every single day. And when you try to compare him to some of the other point guards we have in this class, like Ty played on the number 2 seed Kentucky, but I think he had more expected talent around him in terms of like expectations on the other guys on the team. JD Davison, there's no way he could have done this year what Kennedy Chandler has done. We all have questions about Jan Montero, and we might like some of his upside, but he was playing in the Overtime Elite League against primarily high schoolers, so the jury's still out there. Like, what Kennedy Chandler has done, being the leader on a veteran squad filled with a lot of upperclassmen, that it stands out to me, and it really sticks with me. And I think on that reason alone, the fact that I'm so comfortable with the idea that he could be a backup point guard in the league for like however many years at a bare minimum with spot starter or even starter upside, I really feel like towards the end here, he's climbed back into the first round conversation for me. Not saying he's going to like meteorically rise up my board, but I think I've gotten to the point I kind of have to bring him back in. So, Steven, where are you kind of at on Kennedy Chandler, and what did you see from him that impressed you in this game?
Yeah, he was a guy that, at the beginning of the year, Nathan, you'll remember, he was a guy that I was advocating to be PG1, and ultimately that just kind of fell.
So was I.
Yeah, and then we ultimately ended up agreeing that it was Ty Washington, and again, this isn't counting the whole, Jay Ivey potential down the line thing,
Sure.
but it's fascinating to me, Nathan, that a guy who came in was like initially compared to Chris Paul. Like there were graphics on ESPN games with Tennessee saying, is this the next Chris Paul? For him to just go throughout the season and not play great, but then Tennessee just immediately began to rise in front of everybody, but no one really said anything about it. For him to improve his jump shooting, which happened before our eyes and no one said anything about it, until we come to the tournament time and we're breaking down these matchups and we're analyzing, who do we need to watch for as far as prospects go. We look up and we see, okay, like Kennedy Chandler is a really good point guard right now as a freshman at Tennessee. So that stuck out to me. And then his fingerprints were all over this game. Like Tennessee doesn't stand a chance if Kennedy Chandler is not playing at the level that he was. The passing was there. I think the assists were even an understatement as to how well he was moving the basketball.
It really only fell apart like at the very end, right? Like,
yeah.
It was an 8-point difference, but if you actually watch the game, like that margin was created very late.
Yeah, I mean it's a typical college basketball game where like the last 2 minutes we're like, okay, we have a deficit, we got a foul, and like that's where the margin of victory tends to expand a little bit. But the passing was there, the shooting was present, the defense has kind of quietly always been there with him. I like his suddenness and quickness as an undersized point guard, but he just stood out to me, man. Like he plays with pace, he doesn't feel hurried, and I just like you, I think that he could potentially have like an Ish Smith type career at worst, where he's like this bursty guard who can do a lot of good things and start for some teams, be a tremendous backup point guard on others. And, again, the sky's the limit on how good this guy can actually be whenever he lands in the NBA.
Rucker, any thoughts on anybody else in this game? Did anything else catch your eye in this one?
No, I mean, I really want to praise Kennedy because I think everyone's getting a little scared of him being a little undersized. I understand that, but I'm like you guys. I think at the end of the day, he's going to end up a first-round pick. What he's done lately, I still love how he plays the game. I think if you understand how to get to your spots and play with pace and play smart basketball, and you can hit the outside shot, you can hide a little bit of those, concerns about your measurables and stuff. And I just really think at worst, Kennedy's going to be a heck of a backup change of pace guard, like you're saying, Nathan, with the potential to be kind of a spot starter. He's averaging 15, 3, 5, and 2 while shooting 50% and from the field and 52% from 3 over his last 5 games. If you even go look further than that, like his last 13 games, he's been around that consistency. So he's been outstanding for Tennessee. And I really do think like that game was a good statement of like how Kennedy Chandler can impact a game without, having to score 30 points. And maybe we're just wanting him to be this superstar that he might not have that ceiling, but he also might have a higher floor than I think some of us might think. So I'm a fan of Kennedy Chandler. I still believe. I'm not saying he's going to be one of the best point guards or players in the class, but I do think like he could carve out a role in the NBA for a really long time.
To kind of close out before we move to the next game, like I get scared a little bit watching some of these other point guard prospects that we can look at in this class. And while I do have some concerns about Kennedy, kind of like what we talked about, I'm not scared when I flip on and watch his film, right? Like I still see a very competent, very cerebral basketball player that I don't get that same impression from either of the other two guys that we could throw in this conversation. Like if you're asking me if I'm a team end of the first round, I have a point guard spot that needs to be filled on my team, who would I be looking at? Like I would be absolutely scared to take JD Davison in the back end of the first round right now. Not saying that JD Davison couldn't end up being a better player. He technically has a higher ceiling given some of his physical attributes, his length, his defensive potential. Although Kennedy's a damn good guard defender in his own right, but it's potential versus proven production as well as the leadership qualities. So where I would just be scared to make a bet on somebody else, I'm not scared to make a bet on Kennedy Chandler. I think that definitely has to outweigh and ultimately carry some of the decision making that will likely happen at the end of the first round, because we may not project both of those guys or even all three of them when you throw Montero into the first round. There's also a world that, and we've had some of these discussions in some of our own meetings where we're like, look, teams are going to be looking at these guys in the back end of the first round, and at least one of them, if not all of them, are probably going to go in that range no matter what we think and what our draft philosophies are. So I'm just speaking like if that's something that's going to happen, at that point in the draft, Chandler would be my guy. And I think he's absolutely deserved praise like that. Any other thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, I do actually have one. For everyone that always gets scared of undersized guards, I understand the game has changed over the years, but a combined 27 years in the NBA, two guys under 5'7" played by the name of Earl Boykins and Muggsy Bogues. So can we please calm down on everyone needing to be 6'5" for a point guard? Like, if you can play, they'll figure it out. So
you got guys like Ish Smith, TJ McConnell, Trae Young, Chris Paul. Like, I could keep going, but
Well, and Kennedy plays defense.
Yes, he does.
Yeah,
he's got pop, man.
If Kennedy didn't play defense and couldn't shoot, like, yeah, I'd be selling. But he's a grinder. He'll stick. He'll be fine. And I'm a believer. I root for the little guys. So shout out Earl Boykins.
Let's get into the mean potatoes of the weekend slate, because where I was not quite as excited for a lot of the Saturday games, you flip over to the Sunday slate, it's like a whole different animal. And the game that we can start with was Michigan State and Duke. That was the primetime 5:15 game on CBS. Didn't quite tip at 5:15, but none of the tournament games do. We gotta have the little studio analysis in there in between games, right? Break it up. This was same story. A pretty close game throughout. I really thought Michigan State had a great chance to walk away with the upset here. I was even thinking that we talked about our bracket picks when we were making them, and I was like, man, Michigan State, they could get them. They can move on to the Sweet 16. This could be a real place for Duke to kind of shit the bed here a little bit. And it looks scary at times, but for all that we've talked negatively about Paolo Banchero for a little bit now, man, he has stepped up in this tournament. He has looked like a different player offensively, not defensively. I would still love for him to clean up some of the defensive mistakes, but offensively, he's been much more focused on getting his own inside the arc. Even that, I think that post fadeaway that everybody clipped and put on social media this weekend was absolutely beautiful. Those are the types of things that I think Banchero needed to do more of all along. And now that we're starting to see it, the package is starting to come around for me. Like, maybe have been a tad bit overblown about Paolo Banchero. Rucker, where do you kind of stand on Mr. Banchero after this weekend, and what else kind of stood out to you in this Duke Michigan State game?
I kind of talked about this earlier, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I had this weird vibe that Paolo was going to kind of get another gear going into the tournament. I thought, like, with all the bright lights on him, he might be walking with a little pep in his step, and he's been great. He's been really, really impressive lately. The playmaking has really stood out to me. You're not only just seeing him be more efficient and put up some good numbers shooting the ball, but I think he's making some great reads when it comes to moving the ball, finding guys like across the floor, just playing really good right now. And I do believe, some guys we're probably going to talk about later are no longer playing in this tournament. Paulo's got a big opportunity to create a little bit more buzz now and start kind of giving a little nudge to people like, hey, remember how I was playing at the beginning of the year? Like, now I'm coming back into it. Like, don't forget about me. So I'm excited to watch him. He made some great plays down the stretch. He had a big block. The next game's going to be very telling, I think, for Paulo and for Duke. They're going up against a tough Texas Tech defense that I think is going to have a couple days to prep a little. They're going to throw the kitchen sink and everything at him. So I'm going to be really interested to see how he holds up in that game and if he can keep putting up this type of production. I mean, his last 8 games, he's having 18.6 points, 6.3 rebounds, 4.6 assists with shooting splits of 53.6 and 40% from 3. So, I mean, when that 3-point shot, he's cooking right now. And when that 3-point shot's coming around, like, totally different player. But that fadeaway you're talking about was beautiful. And you're just also seeing, like, now they're starting to make some plays down the stretch. That beginning of the year, they were losing all these tough games. They just had a great final couple minutes against Michigan State with, that Jeremy Roach 3 was huge. So, Paulo's heating up my board too. But the defense, that's for another day. We'll talk about it some other time.
He had a few drives to the basket where he kind of set his man up, and then all of a sudden he hits him with this slick underhand dime like he's Patrick Mahomes on the football field, throwing the ball out to Mark Williams for the easy flush. And yeah, he had the 5 turnovers, and I think more of that was not necessarily from the passing side. I mean, we've talked about some concerns with his handle and him driving into traffic, trying to do a little too much. I think those concerns will still bear themselves out, at least early on in his NBA career. But yeah, Rucker, the passing in particular has been terrific from Paolo for about 2 weeks now. He's really stepped up and has started to throw more of it in there. You didn't talk about your boy Mark Williams. How about Mark Williams?
I don't want the show to go 4 hours.
15 points, 8 rebounds, 7 stocks. Like, Steven, talk to me. Who else impressed you in this one?
Well, I was going to touch on Mark Williams if nobody else did.
There you go.
And I appreciate the restraint that we're witnessing from Rucker. Like, he's a better man than me. But I don't have that type of restraint. The guy that I want to gush on right now is Wendell Moore. And Nathan,
oh boy.
I'm so sorry for you that you watch these games of Duke and you don't walk away with being like, what impact does Wendell Moore Jr. make? Because he just makes winning plays. When the game is breaking down, when Duke needs a steady hand, he's the guy. He's hitting clutch free throws. He's hitting clutch 3-pointers. He's making beautiful reads. He rebounds well for his position. He runs the floor. He's not afraid to defend whoever is lined up from across from him. So I think that Wendell Moore is kind of the unsung hero on this team. And I think that he is worthy of first round consideration because he can play minutes at pretty much any perimeter oriented position. You trust him from the 3-point line. You trust him to make the right passes. You trust him as a defender. He just doesn't make mistakes. And I think that maybe there's a little bit of concern with what he was supposed to be and where he is now. And I was talking about this with Raphael, is that even though that he's like a junior, he's like still only 20 years old. Like, he's right there in terms of age as some of these freshmen that we're gushing praise on, right? So if I have someone who is on the same, we can use fancy terms here, that upward trajectory or like the age, where how the production is supposed to correlate with the age. He's already producing. He's already has more experience, but he's the same age as some of these younger guys. I think that speaks to how easily he can contribute to the next level. He stood out to me in this game. And I would be remiss if we didn't also touch on, the AJ Griffin, that scary ankle tweak that he had in that game. I was like, oh no. And we saw how quick the commentary was.
We're trying to be positive here, Steven. We're trying to be positive.
I'm sorry.
It's important.
But it's important, right? And the commentary was not trying to be positive at all, because as soon as he fell, they're like, oh yeah, we know that he has a long list of injuries. So I'm just curious as to how that impacts his stock.
It's a storyline. Yep.
And then Trevor Kills quietly had a decent game as well, right? So again, Rucker is showing a lot of restraint, but I got your back, bro. I'll bring up the guys that you.
I have my time. I have plenty of time.
There you go.
But go ahead.
I was just gonna say, who you didn't mention? Gabe Brown on the Michigan State side. That's who you didn't mention. My boy.
Bro, was that Kevin Durant out there in that game?
Listen,
I mean that.
Listen, I've been on Gabe Brown Island since like December. I still think he might not make a lot of top 60 rankings. I still think he's going to find a way to stick in the NBA. I think this guy's going to be a pro for quite a while. He's an experienced 6'6" wing/forward. He can defend multiple positions. He can make plays on the ball. When the jumper's fallen, like it did yesterday, which that's not the only game he's had this year where the jumper's fallen, he's actually been a more consistent shooter over his career than you would think. this is the type of guy that NBA teams want to bring in, and how competitive he was yesterday, the energy, him clapping his hands, getting up in everybody's face like that. That's the type of player that I want on my team. So I'm going to drive that Gabe Brown bus until the wheels fall off, baby. Go ahead, Rucker. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No. I actually like Gabe Brown a lot too. I think you're spot on with that. That's the guy that I'll be kind of monitoring because wouldn't shock me if someone's a believer, and it wouldn't shock me if that's a guy that goes to summer league and goes crazy. I'm a fan from what I've seen of him in a couple of games this year. Like it's one of those guys on my list of the deep film dives that I'm making sure to watch Gabe Brown this year because I feel like I could get very intrigued on him as the pre-draft process goes on. But no, I really do like Wendell Moore. I think Steven's right on. The more I watch him, the more that is a wing that every playoff team is going to want to draft, especially like near the end of the first round, because I think it's just a guy that can do a lot of stuff. He can make an impact in a number of different ways. Like if he was a freshman and putting up these numbers, we'd be freaking out about Wendell Moore. But he's just clicked different time, and he's still young for a junior. I think the leaps he's taken as a shooter this year are really remarkable. And now you're kind of seeing a confident player that feels like he can make an impact all over on both sides of the floor. So I'm right there with Steven. I really do like Wendell Moore. I think that's probably going to be the Duke prospect that doesn't get enough attention, in the next coming months. But he's an important piece for that team if they're going to make a run.
We will move on and go very quickly through Iowa State and Wisconsin. I don't think we have to say a ton about this game because it was an ugly, ugly basketball game, unfortunately. Tyrese Hunter over on the Iowa State side, feel like I put out that very positive tweet about him, similarly to what I've put out throughout the year. And he returned that tweet right back to sender with the performance he put up. 1 for 10 from the field, 0 for 3 from three-point range. Did not stand out in that game in the slightest. He looks good with what he does when he puts on a microwave type of performance like he did the other night. I still think he's got a lot of room to make a sophomore elite next year and really, really skyrocket up people's boards. He has so much talent, especially when you go see him live. On the Wisconsin side, the big name is obviously Johnny Davis. 4 for 16 from the field, 0 of 7 for three-point range, was 9 for 11 from the free throw line, 17 points, 9 rebounds, 6 stocks, 2 steals, 4 blocks, was very active on the defensive end, but offensively, I know a lot of people are bringing up the questions of how good is this guy offensively? What can he actually handle? What's it going to look like when he gets to the NBA? Guys, I can't think of a player who we're going to be talking about in top 10 consideration who has had to do more for his team over the course of the year than Johnny Davis. When you factor in some of the injuries, just the workload in general, like the wheels were bound to fall off the wagon at some point. And it's unfortunate that it happened as early as it did in the NCAA tournament. We would have loved to see a matchup like a Wisconsin and Auburn, for example. We'll get to that upset in a second, but it didn't happen. And I still think Johnny Davis has had a spectacular year. I still would claim him as one of quote unquote my guys in this draft cycle. Maybe I won't have him over a certain number of names that I maybe once did like 2 or 3 weeks ago, but I still think he's going to be a really, really good pro who still has star upside. I still see that from Johnny Davis, despite some of the things that we've seen. Steven, what do you think about Johnny Davis? Any parting thoughts as we close out the season on him?
I feel so. I'm not gonna say I feel bad for him because he played his way into being a top 10 level talent, and he's gonna make a lot of money in the NBA. But what I will say that I feel bad for him for is how much he has to do. And we talk about this with football players, but playing through injury, like hurting his ankle in one game, not and you can take this comment however you want. I mean it with all due respect to anybody else who chooses to do it differently. But he could have easily just said, I'm done for the year. I have too much money on the line. I'm going to be a top 10 level talent. And thank you, Wisconsin basketball, for everything that you've done for me. He could have hung it up, but he played through it. To me, like, that's the type of dude that you want on your team, right? Like, not to get all mushy-gushy or like Tim Tebow with the guy, but it's hard to root against a guy like that. When you see guys out there who are on his team basically because they're tall. Like his front court players did not do him any favors that game. And I understand that like guys like Crowell, like they're talented at basketball, but
they're good college basketball players.
They're good college basketball players, but with Johnny Davis is like having to literally do everything when he's their best rim protector, when he's their best rebounder, and the second best player on the team is Brad Davison. He looks like he's in a Bruce Willis movie, just getting punched all day long. He's like, that's your second best player, is a guy who is just getting ran over by
I have
train
never
after
seen a
truck.
guard fall so much on the ground. It's ridiculous. But
he was Captain America, just every time he'd get up and have his hands up like, I can do this all day long. Like, that was his second best player. And it's not like he was making actually like productive plays. He was making winning sacrificial plays where you look at a college level and you would like to see that of maybe like your third or your fourth best player, but he has no sidekick. It was very apparent in that Iowa State game. That's why I feel bad for Johnny Davis, because he's playing through injury. He's sacrificing everything. The Wisconsin roster really didn't do him any favors. Like, he could have had way more assists, but I think I saw like 12 bricks come off of beautiful passes by him. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he looks like as a pro.
Rucker, any parting thoughts on Johnny Davis before Metcalf makes you still talk about him 50 million times over on the No Ceilings podcast?
Yeah, I'm not worried about like his shooting struggles lately. I'm like Steven. I think he was a little banged up and then literally got hurt the same ankle again. So like he's probably just in a torture chamber mentally. I will say I came away really impressed with Johnny Davis watching him over the tournament. Defensively, I was not expecting what I saw, and it got me really like, whoa, okay, I need to really dive into this, because there was some plays, I think it was against Colgate, that they were struggling. You know how close that game was down the stretch, and he was struggling to get a shot to fall. But it was like every time he missed a shot, he just turned it up another level on the defensive side of the ball. And I was just like, man, like, competitor, the way he was guarding guys, he was just smothering them. Like, and I was like, okay, there's something even more impressive with Johnny Davis compared to what he's been doing on the offensive side of the ball this year. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into that, because there was some stuff I saw that I was like, my goodness, I didn't know you had that. I'd seen flashes of it, but he really locked in and really showed me that, like, if he cleans up a little bit of those fundamentals and some bad habits, he might be a nasty two-way player when we're thinking this guy could be an offensive force. So, no, I'm not worried about Johnny at all. I think he's going to be a hell of a basketball player at the next level, and cannot wait to see what he does with some better talent around him. Sorry, Wisconsin fans.
Rucker, this next game, this next question, absolutely, this is right up your alley. This is philosophy.
Yes.
This is teaching all the young bucks out there how to scout the tournament. This is everything we want to everything we want to see and hear from Mr. Rucker right here. Talking about Jabari Smith. Speaking of stinkers, 3 for 16 from the field, 1 for 8 from 3-point range. He did have 15 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 blocks. So it's not like he did nothing over the course of the game, but from a shooting and scoring perspective, when his team needed him to put the ball in the basket, now more than ever, the number one skill that he will be projected at bringing to the table in the NBA, he failed on the biggest stage that he's had all year up to this point. It's the tournament. We get it. He got a lot of exposure. He's sitting at home now. There are going to be a lot of people that have questions. How much should we read into this performance? If this is how it's going to be in the NBA, he's going to have nights like this. Should he go over somebody like Chet, or even another guy like Paolo, who you brought up is still playing in the tournament, who can still build a resume? Calm everybody down, Rucker. Do what you do best. Talk about the overreactions and why we should not have them, because it's just the tournament.
Yeah, this is something that happens every year. One of the top prospects playing on one of the top teams gets eliminated early, and now we're not going to see him for a while. And with this draft class, it's something that a lot of people have thought was even a 3-headed or 4-headed monster now, with Jaden Ivey kind of getting into the mix. Ivy's going to be playing. Chet's going to be playing. Paul is going to be playing. Jabari Smith's at home. So we're not going to be watching him, and we're not going to be buzzing about him. And, a lot of people are going to be, the last thing they saw was this terrible Jabari Smith game, and we're gonna be like, oh man, like that was a bad performance. But it's like, well, what did he do the rest of the year? Like, remember what he did.
Yeah.
And I think it's important when you watch that game. It's like, what type of shots was he taking? Were they good shots? Did he just have a bad shooting night? And it happens. And you're still
Yep.
saying like he couldn't get anything to go, but he still impacted on the boards. Like, what else did he do in that game? And I think this is the scary part of the year for some people that are trying to be, basketball fans, NBA fans. You see the bad game and you're like, oh boy, I don't know. And it's like, well, Jabari's been doing damage all year. Like, he's been absolutely unbelievable. Bad games happen. Bad games happen with the best players in the NBA. Like, sorry, Nathan, your boy Joel Embiid's he can have a bad game. Like, the guy can go 5 for 20 from the
Can
field.
I
Like,
just
it
have
happens.
one year where he shoots over 50% from the field? Like just one, Joel. Like,
But
can it finally be this year? But go ahead.
no, I'm just saying, like, it happened. Like, Jason Tatum's been unbelievable. I know the Jason Tatum game's coming soon where he's 5 for 25 from the field. Like, it just happens with any basketball player on any night. So Jabari had a bad game. They got upset. They got blown out. Don't just focus on that. Go back and watch everything. And I'm hoping people don't overreact because it's going to happen. If Paulo and Duke win against Texas Tech, everyone's going to be like, oh, Paulo, he should be the number one pick. And it's like, well, what, are we just doing this off of 2 games, or did you watch the entire season? So, yeah, that's my scare for the next couple of weeks is Chet and Paulo keep moving on, and everyone's like, well, Jabari had that one game that he kind of sucked. And it's like, yeah, you're right. But he also might be a better player. So that's all I got to say.
Speaking of potential overreactions, I mean, hell, we're talking to a guy who still has Jabari Smith number one
Yeah.
overall on his big
Yeah.
board. You shivering in your boots over there a little bit, Steven? Like what went through your head when you saw some of the game?
You know, Rucker and I, we did shows on this. I think, he did one when I was still doing Draft Kaplan, and then we talked about it on another show. And it's just like, you have to remind yourself so much. You got to be like Bart Simpson in The Simpsons and write it on the chalkboard over and over. I will not overreact to March Madness. I will not overreact to March Madness, but we still do it anyway. And I think that that's what we're saying. And if we're going to play this game where this Miami Auburn matchup is paramount, like this means so much, does that mean that everybody is going to be drafting Isaiah Wong in the first round? Like, if we're gonna pull the string, we're gonna play at this game. If this game means that much, then we need to really reevaluate where we have players, because you can make the argument that Isaiah Wong showed up against one of the best prospects and he won the matchup, and maybe we're undervaluing him and things like that. Or McGusty, another player who's kind of made noise as of
Both
late.
have been spectacular. Not shooters,
Yep.
but 2 of the best scorers we have in the country.
Exactly, right? So if you look at the ACC tournament, and if you look at the NCAA tournament, we have to temper our reactions. And even me, and we're going to talk about a game where I failed to temper my reaction, and I'm okay with that. But
I'm saving the best for last.
I know, I so can't wait. But Jabari Smith Jr., I think anyone, including myself, who has a number 1 overall isn't basing it solely on what he is today, even after this loss, even before the loss, is what he's going to be down the line. And if you go and you've watched him in warm-ups, like I've had the great fortune to do, when he had a bad game against South Carolina that no one really wants to talk about, right? It's happened before, especially with the shooter. Shooters are going to have good or bad shooting performances, but you have to look harder, right? You got to be like Mufasa or Rafiki and look harder, right? Like, you have to make sure that today isn't your end game and where you're evaluating prospects, because maybe that is where Paulo Banchero gets taken number 1 overall. Like, he could be rookie of the year, but when he's 25 to 27 years old, like, who's going to be the better prospect? And that's where you have to start looking for guys like Jabari Smith Jr. and remember that one game isn't everything. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, and when actually, breaking down some of the film from that game, like some of the shots that Jabari Smith had to take, like those very deep handoffs from well beyond the 3-point line that his team kind of expects to go in, getting towards the end of the game because they just need shots to go up. They just need to put points on the board. Like, that's the type of diet you're going to live on in terms of shots taken. Like, you're not going to make a lot of those shots. The outcome's probably not going to be good. And you look at some of the other looks he had inside the arc, guess what? More contested jump shots. And he has actually made a lot of those on the year. That's been a strength of his. That's why he's being viewed so highly as potentially top number 1 or top number 2 overall player. But at the same time, if that's the diet you're living on, eventually those shots are not going to fall. And if you're going to take a player because of his makes, you also have to live with the misses. So I don't think just breaking down the film, that game should have changed your opinion in the slightest on Jabari Smith if you've actually done your homework on him and you've watched all year long. Because I didn't see anything different in that game than what I've seen all year, other than the ball just didn't happen to go in the basket. That's it. And that can be talked about with a number of prospects. See Jaden Hardy, who Steven and I will be talking about with which Coach Spins, and
can't wait.
Another shout out for that podcast.
Oh gosh, I can't wait for that. Shout out Spins. Please tell these boys what they need to know.
Oh, I am fired.
He don't got to convince me. I'll say that.
I'm on Hardy Island. I have not sold anything.
If anybody also didn't see the latest podcast that Corey and Albert did with Rashad Phillips talking about Jaden Hardy too,
phenomenal show.
Go listen to that and go watch that podcast if you haven't as well. Get back on the Jaden Hardy train, folks. That's all we're gonna say. Second to last game we're going to talk about tonight, Ohio State and Villanova. Ohio State lost the game to a better Villanova team. It was a great game all throughout. Colin Gillespie, he gets his flowers. We know he's going to be an NBA player. He probably won't be drafted, or maybe he will. I don't know. Some team's definitely going to give him an opportunity, right? He's going to find his way in the league. He's going to be able to earn a spot. And
if Villanova keeps winning, there's going to be an owner that says, I don't care who we like in the second round. I want Colin Gillespie.
That could absolutely happen. And I wouldn't blame him. Senior point guards, I love it. Take those guys, get them on cheap contracts, get them in your lineup. But the two prospects that we really would want to talk about would be E.J. Liddell and Malachi Branham for Ohio State, both looking like first-round picks. Both had spectacular games against Villanova this past weekend. Both of them performed phenomenally. Steven, I will kick it over to you. Out of E.J. Liddell and Malachi Branham, who do you think had the best performance in terms of what could possibly boost their draft stock?
How are you going to do me like that, Nathan? I love both of them. It's like, which kid is your favorite kid? But I'll touch on one.
That, no, I'm just kidding.
No, obviously it's my no, I'm just kidding. I'm going to temper my feelings for one prospect. I'm going to try to take a page out of Rutgers' book. I'm going to open with Malachi Branham. And here's the thing. The fact that coming into the season, the expectations for him were low. He is this is E.J. Liddell's team. The fact that Branham has come along and become trusted in clutch time situations, it speaks volumes to where he is already as a freshman. The moment didn't seem too big for him. It didn't feel, none of his plays felt rushed, even in a loss. He was composed. And I want to be careful with how I phrase that, because you could say, okay, well, sometimes if you're behind, you have to make big moments and big plays. I don't think that we were robbed of that from Branham. Like, he took over in this game. Over 20 points. He moved the ball well. And if you just watch him run a court for 3 seconds, you just look at him and you're like, that's an NBA player. Even in a loss against Villanova put so much pressure on him, which a coach like Coach Wright out of there, that speaks volumes to how much he respects and or fears Branham this young already.
He had nothing uncontested inside the arc. He did have some open threes, which it was good to see him knock down the open shots, but inside the arc, he had nothing that wasn't contested.
Well, it's because the other guy on this team, Liddell, is such a beast in the paint that you can't just leave him on an island either, right? So Branham is fortunate enough to play alongside a guy like Liddell where he can get open perimeter looks. But when he was creating off the bounce, and I still loved every second of his game, I loved, because even in the mistakes, that he's not afraid. And at his position, that's paramount. And I think that an NBA team is going to be fortunate enough to land him later on in the first. Maybe he's played his way up, and maybe the pre-draft process shakes his way, but I loved his performance. I can't speak enough. For him to be so young, for him not to have the expectations and to play under control the way he did, I just can't speak highly enough of Branham.
Rucker, I I'm gonna pose the same question to you. I think I'll try and answer it as the middleman here. I think Liddell actually stood out to me more, and the reason why it's not because of some of the shots he was able to make. It wasn't the tough looks in the post or the open threes that he was able to knock down, because we've seen those shots all year. But his defense has really been something that I've wanted to go back and do more of a deep dive on, and I will definitely be doing a deep dive on it after the year. But some of the play, it wasn't just the fact that he got the 5 combined steals and blocks. It was just some of the plays he was able to make on the ball, guarding down low, holding his own, being a menace on the front. Like, just some of the things he was able to do defensively. Like, I knew that some of the versatility he brought to the table was a big selling point for him to go somewhere who needs a forward. Like, we've mocked him to Minnesota at this point. Like, that would be a really good fit for him. But like, I didn't realize he could do some of the things he can do defensively, and that I think is really what changes the game and pushes his narrative more into the top 20 conversation than it might have already been. So that, I think, it's not that Brandon wasn't spectacular, because he was. We knew how good of a spot up shooter he is. He's the spot up king in this draft. But what Liddell showed me, I think, is more of what I haven't necessarily seen in depth, and another reason why I need to go back and do a deeper study, and why his draft stock has really started to climb. What about you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about it while you guys were talking. The funny thing about this draft class is it's almost turning into like one of the biggest challenges ever, because it goes like against everything you think of as an evaluator. Like Chet, 195 pounds, 7 foot. If you just told us that, you'd be like, no. But then you watch him and you're like, oh gosh, like, yes. And then you're like, okay, well, where's he going to fit? So like you're puzzled about that. Keegan Murray's the older sophomore that everyone's like, well, and then he just goes and dominates the whole year. We have all these weird questions. Like Kendall Brown, we talked about earlier. EJ's kind of in that category because he's an undersized power forward at 6'7" for a modern NBA that's kind of getting away from the old school power forward. But then you watch him defensively, and I really do think like people are fascinated that he's like 6'7" and wide bodied. And then you watch him defensively, and he has that athleticism, the pop, and his shot blocking is really underrated.
His weak side shot blocking is absurd.
Love it.
For his size and his measurables, like his shot blocking percentage and all that stuff is unbelievable. So, I'm right there with you, Nathan. I keep being so impressed with him. And he's got the potential to be a really nice weapon. I'm exactly what you said. Like if he went to a team like Minnesota, I'd be like, oh my gosh, what a great fit. Just because you put him alongside like a traditional 5 that can potentially space the floor, like Karl Anthony Towns, we're hypothetically saying like Liddell would be a very nice piece next to him. And I think he plays the game the right way, where it's like just mature, understands when to take his shots, understands like, okay, don't force, but he can put you on the block, go to work. He can finish around the basket. And then I've seen him make some rejections, like reacting to switch in the air by the ball handler that he blocks with the other hand, like weak side or on the other side of the rim rejections. Like he has some really nice instincts. So
he does a little bit of everything on the court. Like what really is capable? I understand that he might not be like good to great at everything on the court, but like what is it that he can't do at the very least at an average level on the basketball court? Like I can't think of anything off the top of my head now that I've seen enough.
I think everyone's fascinated that he's like 6'7", 240, and everyone's like, oh, well, he's this big body, small forward that shouldn't be able to move well, but he's a dancing bear. Like he moves so damn quick. When he wants to get somewhere, he can get there fast.
He's even got a second jump that doesn't get discussed a lot. Yep.
And he finishes with authority. He has some rejections where I'm like, how did you get that high? Like this makes no sense. Like physics, someone would be blowing their mind apart. He's a bumblebee,
right?
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like him and Malachi would not shock me if they skyrocketed in draft talks, like throughout these next coming months. I would not be shocked if some teams like, we love Malachi Branham, like lottery. I would not be shocked because, he's been unbelievable the last stretch of the season. He's averaging like over 20 a game in the long stretch. He looks like he has scary upside. EJ's the same way. I think some team's going to be like, this could be the missing piece that really gives us a nice player in our rotation. So I'm high on both, and this weekend of March Madness just cemented what I believe. I really do think there's some really good pieces there for the draft.
The last game that we're going to talk about does fully cement what March Madness is, what it always represents every single year. TCU and Arizona from start to finish. Absolutely brilliant game. Multiple standout performances, even on the TCU side, the losing side. Mike Miles, he didn't have one of his better shooting performances from the field, but you could just feel his impact from start to finish as the point guard for that team. I think that was one of the bigger questions for me, is how much of a point guard actually is he, especially when the shot isn't falling. Like if he's not out there to be a primary scoring / shooting type of point guard, can he actually step up and be more of a floor general? The assist to turnover ratio didn't look great, but I think just what he did in terms of being able to get to his spots, point that Rucker brought up about a few prospects tonight, being able to get to his spots and just make things happen and make the defense overcommit or supposed to be doing against somebody like Miles at times. That's just a dimension that changes the game, and it really was able to swing that in TCU's favor for quite a bit. But towards the end, Arizona fell back, but then they came back. They pushed it, and they won the game in overtime behind standout performances from Ben Mathurin, Christian Coloco. Dalen Terry didn't have his most impactful offensive game, but the 5 steals, he made some very timely plays on the basketball defensively. I mean, what more could you not like from this Arizona team? Like they are really living up to the promise that I thought they could. They are looking like legitimate contenders to win the national championship, as a lot of people picked. Steven, before you blow your load about this game, I'm actually going to kick it. I'm actually going to kick it to Rucker, the resident Arizona fanboy / homer / whatever derogatory term we want to use for somebody who's supposed to be in media, whatever we want to talk about. Give us all of your Arizona thoughts. What did you like? What maybe didn't you like? Give us all your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this quick so Steven has some stuff to talk about. I apologize for anyone that's looking at me on YouTube because that game took about 2 years off my life last night. So, yeah, it was an incredible game. It was just pretty wild. Like, I thought Coloco was absolutely sensational. I still think, like, ever since conference tournament play, he's really sending a statement to NBA executives and decision makers, and I think he's going to be a first round pick if he keeps playing like this. Like, I mean, what else do you need from him? He made a bunch of plays. Like, he was on fire that first half, then kind of slowed down a little bit in the second half. Had some rough possessions, but then kind of battled back, made some big free throws, some big plays, the tip and dunk at the end. Mathurin that was a really impressive game for Mathurin because struggled getting the shot to fall the first half. And what was fascinating to me was Arizona was trying to go small ball with TCU, and they were just like all over the place. They were subbing guys in left and right. Nothing would work. They couldn't really go to their too big lineup. So then they kept trying to match TCU, go small, and then they were getting destroyed on the boards. And
Lampkin was absolutely unbelievable for TCU.
Lampkin was,
he's one of those, if he's on your team, you love him, guys. Yes. And if you play against him, you absolutely hate his guts.
If they won that game, he would have been like all-time March Madness villain team. Like, probably
there's a statue of him at TCU.
So, I mean, and they were just getting destroyed, and he was going nuts. And I was like, man, I don't think they're going to have it. Because I was like, Arizona's all over the place. They kept subbing guys in. They would sub Tabellas in for one possession, then take him out for a guard. And I'm like, what's going on? Kriza looked like me shooting out there. And then finally, like, just Mathurin was just like, screw it. I'm taking it. I'm taking over. And he was just so damn impressive.
Yeah, that one stretch where Kriza missed like 3 3-point shots in a row, and then all of a sudden Mathurin's just like, fuck it, I'm coming in for the rebound. Then he just
want something done right, you got to do it yourself.
Right.
You know?
And that's kind of something I think's really not talked about enough with Mathurin. Like, he wants to go mix it up. He will go hit the glass, and he made a couple of big offensive rebounds. The free throw they had missed, he had the put back right away.
11 of 13 from the free throw line, by the way, speaking of free throws.
But he also just showed, like, he hit a couple threes. They started coming out on him. He got to the free throw line. He put it on the ground and got to the basket, like kind of calmed things down. The three that he hit to push the OT, I was like, oh my gosh, like what
from the logo.
It was just unreal. And then just the dunk, obviously, like when he committed murder on national television and hasn't been arrested for it. Like, I don't understand why we don't, arrest those people. But jokes aside, yeah, that's all I really have. Steven, I'm sorry if I took everything you wanted to say, but it was a great game. I'm pumped for Mathurin. I want to see what they can do because I think Houston's going to be another TCU type of clone that's probably better at being what they want. Like TCU is probably going to try. Houston probably going to try to run with them. And
I think Houston doesn't have like a Lampkin down low to change the game, but they're better in every other aspect of their team than TCU was. So.
And it'll be interesting because Houston's always one of these March Madness teams. Like Sampson does an unbelievable job coaching them. They're always just dogs. And I think Arizona, if they don't clean up that rebounding, they're going to have some problems. But, a couple extra days to prep, that's going to be a fantastic game.
Steven, go ahead. Floor is yours on Mr. Mathurin.
I'll keep this brief.
Sorry, Steven.
No. You're fine. Please, anybody listening who has any pull at all on when to schedule Arizona games, put this man on freaking primetime television because every night, Rucker and I have talked about this it feels like for months now.
Yeah.
Where it's like, we're just convinced that people aren't watching enough Benedict Mathurin.
Yeah, because everybody's grandpas like me who actually want to go to bed at a reasonable hour, Steve. And even Thursday night, 9:59 tip time for Houston, Arizona, damn well it's not going to be 9:59. It's going to be like 10:30. You're actually going to stay up to like 1 o'clock again.
Take a nap in the middle of the day. Have a coffee at about 8 p.m. You're good to go. I mean,
there's ways to do this. There's ways to do this, Nathan. And I did a podcast after the game too. On top of that, so maybe just watch the games. I don't know, but
you're just a madman. So
break my arm to pat myself on the back here, but please put Benedict Mathurin on primetime because I'm so sick of hearing that he can't do X, Y, and Z, and then when you watch him play, he does X, Y, and Z. And invents more letters after the alphabet just to shove it in your face. Like he does create off the bounce. He threw whip passes across the court. He did pull up from mid-range. He dunked all over TCU, and he shot from the logo. He got to the free throw line. He defended his tail off, and he got like 5 rebounds in a row on one possession. So I'm at the point now where I might have him over Johnny Davis, and I might not feel good about it at the end of the day. But Benedict Mathurin might be like the best player that no one's talking about at a respectful level in college basketball. And I've said it for a while. Y'all both know that. I don't have to say it anymore. Put him on primetime and everyone else will watch it. Christian Coloco, my goodness, like he was everywhere that first half. In the second half, like people will look at the Lampley performance and be like, well, how can you like Christian Coloco after Lampley dominated? Well, go back and watch the film because Lampley won everyone over by being so demonstrative after every play. Like Christian Coloco just showed up and won the game. Like he's a bring your lunch pail type big, and like you want to keep poking at me, and here you go. I'm gonna cut your head off at the end of the game. And then Dalen Terry, he didn't have the biggest offensive performance, but I've been sarcastically saying that he's the number 1 overall pick, but I mean, he might be playing himself into legitimate first round conversations, and people may not even have to like be scared to say that out loud by the end of the tournament.
I have very little to add. I think both of you guys did a great job. That was an eye opener. We've seen Mathurin have standout performances beginning of the year, in the middle part of the year. Rucker and I have talked about multiple of them on this very podcast. The Illinois game really stands out to me in particular.
Yep.
This is probably his best game of the year, unless he does something where he goes even more nuclear in later games in this tournament. But yeah, I think you can argue a lot of different guys in the top 10 in terms of like their pecking order. But if you're leaving Mathurin outside like your top 9, top 10 at this point, like what are you doing? Like let's
what are you watching?
I don't think he can be lower than 10 for me at this point. Even if we want to reinsert Shane Sharp into the conversation, whenever the hell that comes up, like I can't have Mathurin lower than 10 at this point, and I might flip some guys around. Who knows? But yeah, he's definitely a top 10 pick.
I think one last thing that's I think is actually important that I just thought of for anyone listening. Like I always say, don't overreact to performances in these games. And like, yeah, Mathurin was amazing, but I think it is also important when guys have this game, how they respond, because that also could unlock another player that you haven't seen all year, where it's all of a sudden like he has that game on the biggest stage. And then all of a sudden the next game starts out 2 for 2 and he's got a little extra pep in his step. And he's like, I'm here. Like, yep, this is me. I'm going to show everyone. And then all of a sudden, something might click where it's like, okay, whoa, like he had the best game. His confidence is soaring. Now all of a sudden he's just a complete monster. Like that's the stuff you got to keep in your head because, of course these guys are going to be pumped when they have a big game in the regular season, but when it's March Madness, the biggest stage, and they, absolutely take over and we're the talk of the town for, 3 or 4 days. And then all of a sudden the next game, they sort of find their groove early on. Like that also could show you something else of like, hey, now I'm really starting to believe in myself. And maybe Mathurin does keep creeping up. I think Steven's right on. Like we've had him top 10. I still think he's one of the more underrated guys in the top 10. Like, and it's weird to say, but he's just really starting to show like he can do a lot more than I think people thought.
Well, you're also just looking for as many excuses as possible to post that freaking Price is Right meme that you absolutely love.
Yeah,
yes, everyone, that is
works.
Tyler Rucker's.
If you don't laugh at that, I need to have a serious heart to heart with you. Like we need to go to a therapist. That's the funniest thing ever.
Well, they could be 16 years old and not understand what that television show is.
Yeah, that's actually probably realistic, but come on.
Bob Barker, rest in peace, national treasure.
R.I.P. Bob. Now you're gonna get it, Bobby.
We had some other, I should say, I had some other names written down in terms of prospects buzzing. We don't have to touch on those guys. We will definitely talk about them at other points. But to close out the podcast, Steven, give us your other 2 Warriors of the Week that you wanted to highlight.
Yeah, for sure. And these are out of 5. And if you want to find out who the other 2 names were, just go to NoCeilingsNBA.com and go look up the Weekend Warrior, and you'll get the full starting 5 here. But we already touched on Drew Timme. Oscar Tshiebwe, in a losing effort, put up 30 points on 11 of 16 shooting, was 8 of 12 from the free throw line, 16 rebounds, 2 assists, 4 stocks. That's 2 steals and 2 blocks apiece, and was just part of a lion. If you listen to the World of Basketball podcast with Fran Fraschilla, he interviewed Oscar Tshiebwe, and from that moment on, like he was just one of those dudes that you love. Like you'll run through a wall watching him play or listening to him talk. I think he used the term warrior in every sentence that he used to describe himself, and listening about his upbringing and everything that he's had to overcome off the court, to see him just be on an absolute berserk rampage on the court is so much fun to see. And then the last guy is the unsung point guard out of San Francisco, Jamari Bouye out of San Francisco. Bouye! He put up 36 points in a losing effort against Murray State, was 13 of 26 from the floor, was only 4 of 12 from deep, but he was really their only offensive threat. Was
Such a fun game, though.
Absolutely. Game. The fact that they played each other is a crime. They should have gone up against bigger name schools and been upsets, but it is what it is. He also had 3 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, a block, and only 1 turnover out of all the plays that he was responsible for. He only turned the ball over once, and this might be a guy who, senior point guard from a, kind of a lesser known school, gets some sort of Exhibit 10, 10-day contract, and may find his way onto a roster. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing Bouye mentioned, because NBA players are talking about him. We saw CJ McCollum, among many others, say that's a player. And if NBA guys are saying that, they might be onto something. So I would keep an eye on, Jamari Bouye moving forward.
Well, boys, we covered a ton of ground in this podcast. I can't thank you enough for coming on. As always, Rucker, do it. This is you, your outro, your plugs, what you do every week. Go ahead.
I'm at noceilingsnba.com, and I cannot manage how much content is about to start pouring out. So please just buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride, as I always say. Now I actually got a couple stuff in the work. The prospect videos are coming back. We're going to have some season-long highlights of everyone at No Ceilings, which is going to be fun. I just can't wait. I mean, this is awesome. Thank you, as always, Nathan, for having me on every Monday. This has been great. Steven, you're already kicking ass, so I love it. And
thank you,
can't
sir.
wait to keep doing this with you guys. We got some fun times ahead.
Steven, give your plugs, man.
Yeah, so if first off, I want to shout out 2 podcasts that were gracious enough to have me on to give my thoughts about, basketball prospects. First off, my buddy Zach Ramey, aka Knowledge from the Off the Glass podcast. He had me on. We talked about a lot of the same stuff, and I kind of foretold what was going to happen with Benedict Mather, and I'm really proud of that. So go and listen to the Off the Glass podcast anywhere you get your podcast. And then Rafael Barlow, friend of everybody here at No Ceilings, he had me on his show after the big news that Chad Ford is kind of handing over the reins for him. He had me on, and we talked about a lot of these same players and games as well. That was a lot of fun. So go listen to, you can look up the Big Board. You can look up the Locked On Sports Network, where he contributes, I think, like twice a week. He does a phenomenal job. So shout out to those guys. But if you want to follow me, you can do so. I'm most active on Twitter at Steven. That's with the PH. So Steven G Hoops. And I got written work that's coming out on NoCeilingsNBA.com, as well as the rest of our freaking fabulous team. Great pieces put out literally every day so far. So if you're a sicko like us, go and check out the website. And then obviously you can keep listening to me co-host with this handsome devil on the Draft Deeper podcast. Anywhere you get your podcast, go and look that up. Like, share, subscribe, rate, review, all that fun stuff. And Nathan, I believe that we got some pretty cool guests lined up in the works.
We do. So thank you again, as always, for listening to this episode of the podcast. As Steven mentioned, you can get this wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at Draft Deeper. Stay tuned to No Ceilings. Again, subscribe, noceilingsnba.com for plenty more written content. As stay locked into this podcast feed. As we mentioned, we'll have Coach Adam Spinella on later this week. We hopefully have some podcasts coming up with some more big name guests. We're hoping to have a pretty big April and May stretch before everybody gets too busy. They don't want to come on these little shows like Draft Deeper anymore. So we'll try and knock everybody out as soon as possible and keep the content flowing. But we'll all be back next week. We'll be talking about the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight. Rutgers not going anywhere yet. He's still locked in. It'll be another Monday, just like usual. But until then, thank you all for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.